Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. What initially looked like a minor incursion with 1,000 soldiers and 100 armored vehicles and tanks by the Ukrainians has now turned into a major push deep inside the Russian territory of Kursk. Ukrainians are gaining ground, and despite the fact that this incursion has gone on for over 10 days straight, Russia has so far failed in landing a credible counterpunch. But here's the thing. A Tsar who cannot protect his territory cannot remain a Tsar. So the pressure on Vladimir Putin to respond to the Kursk offensive is tremendous. For the last couple of months, Russia had been very publicly testing its tactical nuclear weapons. But can the Kursk incursion that is being carried out by the Ukrainians with the use of Western weapons now trigger Russia's doctrine for the usage of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield? Our next report gets you the details. This was the moment when Ukraine, using a rocket fired from the American supplied HIMARS, destroyed a crucial bridge over the river Siem in the Kursk region. Logistically, this bridge was used by Russia to supply its troops stationed on the front lines, and its destruction means Kremlin will be greatly hampered in its ability to bring in the supplies for its troops. From the 6th of August, since the Ukrainian incursion began, Kiev has managed to capture 1,150 square kilometers of Russian territory, which includes 82 settlements along with the border town of Sudza. And so far, an estimated 120,000 Russians have been forced to flee from the front lines in Kursk to safety, as the whirling Russian invasion appears to have come a full circle. The hunter suddenly finds himself in the position of the hunted. And what is embarrassing for the Russians are the repeated videos that the Ukrainian army is putting out of the Russian soldiers surrendering in some cases almost without a fight. Russia claims most of its surrendered troops are reservists who were never really meant to see active combat. And to keep the morale of its soldiers up, Russia has also put out videos of its own showing the intruding Ukrainian soldiers being captured in Kursk. But this is no longer a limited incursion with just 1,000 soldiers and 100 armored vehicles and tanks. Footage shared by Kiev shows more and more tanks and armored vehicles rolling into the territory, in a gambit the Ukrainian president has described as to make the Russians negotiate more fairly.
There have already been several reports from Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi on the frontline situation and our operation in the Kursk region. We see that the occupier is suffering losses, and this is beneficial, very beneficial for our defense. This includes the destruction of the Russian army's logistics and the depletion of their reserves. We must inflict maximum damage on all Russian positions, and we are doing so.
There are pitched battles that are being fought all along the front lines. In the Russian-controlled city of Donetsk, repeated Ukrainian strikes have resulted in a shopping center going up in a massive blaze, resulting in injuries to 7 people. Ukraine's strategy is not just to dampen the Russian morale, but also strike at the heart of Russia's infrastructure and logistical capacity. The Kursk nuclear power plant, which is just 60 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, is at serious risk of falling into the Ukrainian hands. Russia is now devising strategies on how to supply power to almost 1 million people in Kursk if Kiev captures the nuclear plant. For the first time since the end of the Second World War, tanks of an invading army have rolled onto the Russian soil. In recent months, Russia has repeatedly and publicly tested its tactical nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons have never been used in the battlefield before. But according to the Russian doctrine for tactical nuclear weapons could be deployed by Russia in the event an invading army inflicts heavy losses on the Russians and threatens the Russian sovereignty. The NATO military alliance still claims that it does not want a direct war with Russia. But the longer this war drags on, and the longer Moscow is unable to expel the Ukrainian intrusion, the risk of this conflict exploding into a tactical nuclear contest remains very real. There is a cruel irony to talk of negotiations for a ceasefire deal on the one hand and to approve $20 billion of weapons on the other. Not for the first time, the American President Joe Biden who's backed the Israeli war in the Gaza Strip to the hilt, has said that a ceasefire deal has never been closer. But what impact have the words of the American president had on what is unfolding on the ground in the Gaza Strip? The death toll of the Palestinians in the relentless campaign of bombings by the Israelis has now crossed the 40,000 mark. There are starvation deaths that are being reported due to an acute shortage of food. The Israeli army has again asked the Palestinians to evacuate from Khan Yunis and has directed the Palestinians to move to ever-shrinking safe zones. And the irony is, these safe zones have also been repeatedly bombed by Israel. Despite the fact that there have been mass protests across the world, and this war in the Gaza Strip has now gone on for over 10 long months, the obvious question that people would want an answer for is, why has a ceasefire deal proven so elusive for the Gaza Strip? And who is financing and supplying weapons for this war, in which the cruel wheel of violence just keeps on turning over and over again? "31-year-old Mohammed Abu al-Qumsan is inconsolable. He had stepped out of his home to get the birth certificates for his twin newborn 4-day-old children when he got a call from his neighbors informing him that his home, where his wife along with their newborn twin children and his mother-in-law were staying, had been bombed by Israel. And when he rushed back home clutching the birth certificates of his newborn twin children, his wife, his newborn twin children and his mother-in-law had all been killed in the strike.
I went to issue the birth certificates for the children. My wife gave birth the day before yesterday. I didn't celebrate them yet, and she had just delivered by cesarean section. She was still tired, didn't get up or move much yet. God is my suffice and the best disposer of my affairs."
The funeral prayers for the twin newborn children were said just 4 days after their birth. The Al-Maghazi refugee camp was again bombed by Israel on suspicion that Hamas was hiding in the refugee camp. 4 people were killed and dozens of others sustained serious injuries. And young children were later seen picking up the pieces to salvage whatever little they could from the rubble. The 10 long months of blockade on the trickle of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip has meant that hunger is tightening its noose around the Palestinians in Gaza. Most Palestinians in Gaza are out of rations. What little food there is exorbitantly expensive, and charity kitchens are struggling to provide a single meal a day for the Palestinians in northern Gaza. On the other hand, the cemeteries in Gaza are full beyond their capacity. The death toll in the Gaza Strip has crossed the 40,000 mark. There are said to be several thousand bodies that are still buried underneath the rubble of the bombed buildings that are unaccounted for. The United States, along with Egypt and Qatar, is mediating negotiations for a ceasefire deal. And just ahead of the peace talks in Doha, the United States has approved another $20 billion of weapons for the state of Israel. Joe Biden, who's backed the Israeli war to the hilt, was found cycling at his Delaware vacation home. He later at the White House said that a ceasefire deal is closer than ever before.
I'll say one thing about one of the reasons why I was late for you all was I was dealing with the ceasefire effort in the Middle East. And we are closer than we've ever been. I don't want to jinx anything, but as my grandfather would say, with the grace of God, good little neighbors, a lot of luck, we may have something. But we're not there yet. But it's much, much closer than it was 3 days ago. So keep your fingers crossed. Thank you.
So as the American president is urging for everyone to keep their fingers crossed, Israel has again ordered that the Palestinians should flee from Khan Yunis. And the Palestinians are on the move again, on foot, carrying whatever little belongings they have in search of a safe place.
I don't know where to go. There is no safe place. Honestly, I don't know where to go. There is no safe place in the Gaza Strip to stay. They say Al-Mawasi is safe. No, it is not safe. They killed children and made us displaced. Where should we go? We only have God. No Arab country is helping us. We have God and we will stay in our land. Whatever they do to us, We are staying in our land. This is our land and Jerusalem is for us. They won't take a meter from us. With God, we will win.
The West Bank is a Palestinian territory that has been illegally occupied by Israel since 1967. Separated from the Gaza Strip by the Israeli territory, West Bank has witnessed a surge in illegal Israeli settler violence since the Gaza war started on the 7th of October last year. According to the Palestinian authorities, at least about 633 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank in the last 10 months in acts of violence by Israeli settlers who are backed by the Israeli troops. In the latest such attack that took place on the 15th of August, violent Israeli settlers targeted a village west of Nablus, killing one Palestinian and also grievously wounding another. During the attack, which has been described by the Israeli President Isaac Herzog as a clear case of a pogrom, the Israeli settlers also set ablaze several vehicles and Palestinian homes in the area and hurled rocks and Molotov cocktails. The United States and a number of European nations have imposed sanctions on some violent illegal Israeli settlers and have repeatedly called on the State of Israel to curb such attacks by these settlers. But why have these attacks been on the rise? Our next report gets you the details.
Close to 100 Israeli settlers, masked and armed, attacked the Palestinian village of Jit, near the city of Kalkilia in the occupied West Bank on Thursday. A 23-year-old Palestinian man, Mahmoud Abdel Kader Sadda, was killed, and another suffered critical gunshot wounds to the chest in the attack. During the rampage, the armed colonists also set fire to the cars and houses of the villagers. The attack by violent Jewish settlers was captured on the surveillance camera of a Jit resident, Hassan Arman.
Yesterday around 7:30 p.m. we were sitting here outside the house. Life was normal. Suddenly we saw around 100 settlers attacking us with no previous warning. They set fire to the cars and they attacked the house. They attempted to enter the house and set fire in the car inside. They tried to set fire in the house while women and children were inside. But thanks to God, we were able to stop them. We faced them. But after they left, they moved to another area and they shot on the young men who are facing up to them in the olive grove.
Though the villagers of Jit are no stranger to settler attacks, the sheer brutality and planning behind the Thursday attack surpassed any witnessed earlier. Expressing concern and anger, the residents were of the opinion that the proverbial red line had been crossed in this attack, compelling them to have a rethink about the way forward.
We are in a peaceful village. We have witnessed attacks before, but not in such a brutal and organized way. What happened was not about 4 or 5 settlers who just wanted to carry out an attack. What happened is something organized that took 2 to 3 days to plan, because they had weapons, tear gas, pepper spray and knives, all kinds of weapons. Uniformity of dress, they were all dressed the same with a black mask, black shirt, black trousers, all dressed uniformly. They are an organized unit and they are coming to do this. We are a peaceful village. We don't attack them, but we can see that the settlers are crossing a red line, and this will make us rethink our position.
Reportedly, one Israeli has been apprehended for questioning. In the past, Israeli security forces have been accused of standing by and allowing groups of violent settlers to attack houses and villages in the occupied West Bank. Late in the day, the White House condemned the attacks by Israeli settlers on Palestinian civilians, calling them unacceptable and must stop. Though such attacks have attracted international concern, Israeli settlement in the West Bank, considered illegal under international law, has hit new records. Excluding annexed East Jerusalem, some 490,000 Israeli settlers live in the West Bank, alongside roughly 3 million Palestinians. What's worse is that the far-right groups, whose support is crucial for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, advocate more Israeli settlements in the West Bank or even outright annexation. Given the particularly sensitive and difficult period in the region, this escalation in the settler violence needs to be reined in urgently.
Three years ago, on the 15th of August, the Taliban forces seized control of the capital Kabul after the American-backed government of the then Afghan President Ashraf Ghani collapsed and he fled into exile. This week, marking the third anniversary of the withdrawal of the American forces, the Taliban celebrated by holding a series of events nationwide, including a military parade in Kabul. But the Taliban administration remains unrecognized by any other state, with restrictions on women remaining a key sticking point. And such restrictions have been described by the United Nations as a clear case of gender apartheid. Our next report tells you as to what's been happening in Afghanistan since 3 years that the Taliban have been in charge.
Afghanistan's Taliban rulers celebrated the day of victory over Western occupiers on Wednesday. Marking the occasion, a military parade in presence of Chinese and Iranian diplomats was held at Pogrom, the former US air base which once served as the linchpin for US-led operations against the Taliban for 2 decades. The military parade paid homage to their homemade bombs used in the war, fighter aircraft and goose-stepping Taliban troops. The base where once the Taliban fighters were imprisoned, helicopters and fighter aircraft flew over. Hundreds of attendees cheered and applauded the towing of Soviet-era tanks and artillery pieces through the largest airbase in Afghanistan. In the streets of Kabul and Kandahar, spontaneous celebrations took place, marking the return of peace 3 years earlier to the war-torn country. Given the tragedy unfolding in Gaza and the blatant disregard for Gazan human rights, the hypocrisy of the United States and its allies was also condemned.
There's no doubt that the ugly face of the United States and its allies who shouted about human rights in the past has now been fully exposed. What's happening in Gaza is an example that has exposed the ugly face of all those who have termed themselves defenders of children's rights and women's rights.
But the world is also watching with condemning eyes what is happening to Afghan women. Afghanistan has the dubious distinction of being the only country in the world to stop girls and women attending secondary schools and universities. Since their ascension to power in August 2021, Taliban has barred education for girls above 6th grade. Their argument is that it does not comply with their interpretation of Islam, although, interestingly, no other Muslim country prohibits girls from being educated. The political erasure of women is a blot on the 3-year rule of Taliban in Afghanistan. It's an attack on women's agency targeted to diminish their role in the political, social, and economic arena.
3 years ago, a woman in Afghanistan could technically decide to run for president. Now, she may not even be able to decide when to go and buy groceries. Now, I'm not saying that 3 years ago it was perfect. It was not perfect. But it wasn't this. 3 years in. To date, no woman in Afghanistan has a leadership position anywhere that has influence politically, either at national or provincial level. When women are engaged in the Taliban's structures, their roles are largely to monitor compliance of other women with their discriminatory decrees. And this political erasure is really mirrored at social level.
According to the United Nations, Afghanistan's Taliban government has deliberately deprived at least 1.4 million girls of their right to an education during its 3 years in power. Consequently, the future of an entire generation is now in jeopardy, with dangers of child labor and an early marriage lurking around the corner. Afghan women have put up a brave fight so far against this systematic Taliban oppression. But it isn't their fight alone, and the world has to do a whole lot more than merely condemn.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has been plagued by many armed groups in its east who are fighting for power, land and valuable mineral resources. Preeminent amongst these is M23, a largely Tutsi rebel group that is linked to neighboring Rwanda, although Kigali has repeatedly denied the charge. But last month, a United Nations report claimed that anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 Rwandan government forces are deployed in neighboring eastern Congo, and they operate alongside the M23 rebel group, which has been making major advances in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, given these advances, young Congolese women are now joining the local self-defense militia against the M23 group. At the beginning of this month, in a major breakthrough, a ceasefire deal was put in place between Kinshasa and Kigali, following talks that were mediated by Angola. But the question is this: can this tenuous ceasefire hold? Our next report gets you the details.
Africa's second largest country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, ranks amongst the 5 poorest nations in the world. Compounding the problem for the impoverished nation is the insurgency in its east, which it has been battling for decades. More than 120 rebel groups are fighting with the National Armed Forces for power, land and valuable mineral resources. Fighting spiked in late 2021 when the preeminent M23 rebels, largely dormant for nearly a decade, staged a comeback and captured large swathes of territory in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, displacing over 1 million people. M23 group reportedly has the backing of both Rwanda and Uganda. Playing the peacemaker, Angola has been mediating in the conflict between Rwanda-backed M23 rebels fighting the Democratic Republic of Congo forces. Following the second meeting between the foreign ministers of Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Rwanda at the Angolan Presidential Palace in capital Luanda on the 31st of July, a ceasefire effective from midnight on 4th of August was agreed upon, but the mood on the streets was not as optimistic.
A ceasefire has been declared, but some localities remain under occupation. It's a ceasefire that doesn't help us at all. They may stop fighting, but the war hasn't ended yet, and they haven't liberated the occupied villages. We want all the zones to be liberated so that activities can resume normally in Goma and the inhabitants of the occupied zones can return to their homes. That's really what I think.
This week, on the 12th of August, Angolan President João Lourenço met with the Democratic Republic of Congo President Felix Tshisekedi in Kinshasa to further discuss the ceasefire agreement and efforts to maintain peace in the troubled region. Reportedly, sporadic clashes between the Congolese government troops and the M23 rebel group have continued. Following the meeting between the two leaders, Congolese Foreign Minister briefed the press.
The two heads of the state welcomed the entry into force of the ceasefire on August 4th, and both reiterated and expressed their firm commitment to ensuring that the ceasefire is respected and observed by all parties that signed it. The two leaders also called for all other ongoing efforts to create an environment conducive to a lasting resolution to the conflict.
According to the United Nations estimates, the conflict in North Kivu province alone has displaced more than 1.7 million people, contributing to a record 7.2 million displaced persons across the Democratic Republic of Congo due to various conflicts. Strategies to strengthen the ceasefire have been discussed and security challenges addressed. But will this ceasefire agreement result in lasting peace in the insurgency-plagued DR Congo's east?
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.